An engine failure. As a pilot, you're trained on what to do, but still, you may not be ready if the time comes. When it happens, a real-world engine out is likely to catch you off guard. You're thinking to yourself, this can't be real, can it? Engine failures are rare, but when one happens, you should be ready. Going beyond rote memorization, you should develop a strategy to be spring-loaded for an engine failure in any situation at any altitude. First of all, don't panic. Fly the airplane and pitch and trim for best glide. Don't worry about pinning the speed exactly. Just go to the nearest 5 knots and run a quick mental checklist to keep the airplane under control. Did you do something that caused the engine to quit? Undo it. How high or low are you above the Earth? In this chart, you can see that altitude equals both distance and distance and time equal options. Here are 2 good rules of thumb for most GA aircraft. 1,000 feet gets you 1.5 miles of gliding distance, and multiply your altitude by 2 to figure out how much time you have. In this example with a Cessna 172 and a 9:1 glide ratio, at 4,000 feet, you'll glide about 6 miles and take around 8 minutes to descend. Another good rule of thumb to remember is GAS. Assuming nothing else is wrong, if you have gas in your tanks, air going to the engine, and spark from your ignition system, the engine should run. Some quick troubleshooting can often get an engine running again. If time allows, go through the restart checklist, squawk 7700, and declare an emergency on 121.5 or with ATC if you're already talking to them. Keep in mind that not all engine failures are an abrupt full-stop deal. There may be cases where you lose partial power or have engine surges from carb ice, improper mixture, ignition problems, or early stages of fuel starvation. Sometimes all you have to do is turn the fuel pump on or switch tanks. The engine out checklist can be useful, but if there's not enough time, just fly the airplane and remember the GAS checklist. If you've done your troubleshooting and still the engine remains silent, you are now committed to landing. Close the throttle to avoid it suddenly springing to life when you're near the ground. It's okay to be nervous. The bottom line is to focus on landing the airplane safely. If you have enough time and altitude, call up ATC or use your GPS and moving map while scanning ahead, behind, below, and off the sides to find a suitable airport. But if one's not in reach, rural roads and smooth grassy fields can usually provide a safe alternate. A highway's grassy median strip could also work, but you have to watch out for traffic, power lines, overpasses, and road signs. Above a forest, fly the airplane under slowest possible speed right into the treetops to cushion the landing. The goal is to keep the cabin intact, helping your chances of survival. Over water, you'll have to interpret winds, swells, and currents. Land parallel to the swells and keep the yoke all the way back to reduce chances of flipping over. Once you pick a spot, stick with it. Wherever you choose to land, don't lift the nose to gain altitude or stretch the glide. This is only going to accelerate the descent and increase your chances of a stall or spin. Remember, pitching for the nearest 5 knots of best glide speed will give you the greatest distance with the least amount of drag. Landing in a soft field with gear up can prevent you from nosing over, especially on water landings. On the other hand, gear down can help absorb the impact from rough terrain. Flaps will help you lose altitude and give you the slowest touchdown speed, but they add drag, so you're going to lose gliding distance, and that could cause you to come up short. Side slipping on final might be a good alternative, but that means you'll be going faster at touchdown than you would with flaps. Consider dumping the flaps at the last moment to help slow down as much as possible. Make sure you and your passengers are buckled in with seatbelts and shoulder harnesses and are bracing for impact. A folded jacket in front of the face and body can soften a forward jolt during landing. Front seat passengers should push their seats back as far as possible. After you make your last configuration changes on short final, turn off the master and alternator to reduce the risk of a fire. Once the airplane stops, evacuate and make sure everyone is safe. Accident data shows that higher than 90% of off-airport landings are survivable, so the odds of success are in your favor. An engine failure can be a scary experience, but remember to keep these key points in mind. But what if an engine failure happens during takeoff? Do you have a plan? There are a few different scenarios that you should be ready for. For example, if the engine quits before liftoff, throttle back, maintain control, and stop. After rotation with enough runway remaining, throttle back, land straight ahead, maintain control, and stop. During climb-out, pitch for best glide towards your landing spot and troubleshoot if you have enough time. Is it ever a good idea to turn back to the runway? Let's take a look. Immediately after takeoff and at a low altitude, your best bet is often to land ahead or no more than roughly 30 degrees to the left or the right. There's just not enough room to turn back. Near pattern altitude, you may be able to nurse the airplane back to the runway, a taxiway, or grassy area on the airport. This is going to depend on your proficiency and your aircraft's performance. We don't recommend attempting a restart at this point. You've got your hands full, so you should concentrate on landing in control. Whatever the situation, remember, don't try to stretch the glide. An engine failure on takeoff requires immediate action. A pre-takeoff briefing should help you determine an abort point and think through takeoff emergency scenarios. Let's look at some ways that commercial operators prep themselves for the best chance of success in an emergency. First, brief all possible emergency scenarios, including engine outs over water and dangerous terrain, and during takeoff and landing. Second, before takeoff, determine if density altitude, runway length, obstacles, visibility, and whether it's day or night will affect your response time and airplane performance. Lastly, and certainly not least, is a thorough pre-flight. The lives of you and your passengers depend on it, so make it count. Improper or overlooked maintenance can cause mechanical failures, so investigate or report engine system squawks and get them resolved. As an owner, have oil samples tested regularly and consider installing an engine monitor that shows the health of each cylinder. During refueling, clearly communicate and confirm the type of fuel, how much you need, and which tanks to fill. Remember to check the receipt to make sure you got what you requested. Speaking of fuel, make sure you have enough with adequate reserves and manage it wisely. We recommend landing with at least 1 hour of fuel remaining. No one plans to run out of fuel, but it happens. To make sure it doesn't happen to you, set a timer to switch fuel tanks as planned. Got tip tanks for an in-flight fill-up to extend your range? Know the transfer process and limitations, because botched procedures can starve engines of fuel and cut your flight short. During engine start, taxi, and run-up, make sure the fuel selector is set properly and the mixture is full rich or leaned for high-altitude operations. If there's a primer, make sure it's locked. After the run-up, do not switch tanks. Doing this creates the potential risk of a fuel flow problem during takeoff. Just one more thing before rolling onto the runway. Use all of it and have an engine out plan. Again, engine failures are rare, but if it does happen to you, follow these steps and they will give you the best chances for a safe outcome. Are you ready?